Chapter 221 Banquet, Part 2. The hall where the Galvera banquet was taking place was attached to a 5-star hotel, where some guests would go to dress in the rooms or touch up their makeup. And as the banquet hall buzzed with anticipation for Xavier Galvera's arrival, in the quieter corridors of the hotel, Mia and Neil had just arrived through the back doors, both not yet dressed for the occasion. Mia's clothes had been sent to the hotel instead of their house, and they had arrived late because of an unexpected visit to the hospital earlier in the day. Mia had woken up with a strange stomach pain, and despite Neil's insistence that she stay home after the doctor had said her stomach pain was due to side effects of her medication, Mia had assured him she could manage. Knowing the significance of her presence and what he planned to do for her after the banquet, Neil had reluctantly agreed to let her come along. But every second, he would be asking if she was all right. As they reached the room where Mia's clothes were, Neil stopped and looked down at her, concern evident in his gray eyes. "Are you sure you'll be fine alone? Do you need help getting ready? I can help you dress up." Mia had declined Neil's suggestions of hiring her a makeup artist and an assistant to help her dress, because of her wariness with people these days. She'd said she could do her own makeup and dress up. And since Rain didn't know they were the hosts of the banquet, Mia couldn't call her here to help her with dressing up. And now that Neil suggested to help her, she shook her head with a reassuring smile. "I'll be okay, Neil. You need to go prepare yourself. Liam is waiting for you in your room. Go on and don't keep him waiting. He has been calling the whole time on the way." Neil nodded reluctantly, still worried about her. "I'll come back for you in an hour then," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. As he turned to leave, he paused before entering the elevator, looking back at her one last time. "Don't push yourself too hard. Let me know if you feel any discomfort," he muttered, his voice soft but firm, before the elevator doors closed, leaving Mia standing in the hallway, preparing herself for the evening ahead. As she turned to open the room's door, she felt the tightening pain in her stomach return. She leaned her head against the door for it to subside before she opened the door and sighed in relief when the pain disappeared completely. She didn't know what was wrong with her lately. If she didn't have a terrible, skull-splitting headache, she'd have a stomach-tightening pain. Closing the door behind her, Mia decided to take a quick shower in the bathroom, hoping the pain would not bother her evening. After her shower, she walked out of the bathroom with a robe provided by the hotel. She was drying her hair when she paused at the sound of a cheery female voice raised in greeting in the hallway of her room. "Trisha, darling, you look marvelous. It's been ages since I've seen you. I bet you are also here to flash those full tits of yours to Xavier Galvera and make him your man." "Oh, come on, Erica. As if that's not why every young female elite of the country is here. I traveled here all the way from Rome just so I could have the man, and I'm not backing out of it until I get him." "You sure still think too highly of yourself, Trisha. What if the man is married? Are you still going to seduce him to your bed?" joked the other female. "As if marriage has ever stopped me from getting a man I want to seduce. I came here for business, and I'm not backing down until I have him in one of the rooms in this hotel. It would even be wonderful if one of his seeds takes root in me. Imagine how such a scandal would be to my career. I'd be the talk of the show in a month." Mia stiffened at the woman's words. She didn't have to be told to know dozens of other women in that hall were here for the same purpose. Whoever that Trisha is, Mia thought in disgust, was a delusional bitch if she thought for a second Mia would allow any woman near her Neil in that hall, or give them the chance to seduce him. The woman continued to say, "Well, my father wanted to meet him for some business purposes, but I want to meet him for my own purpose. I wonder what's taking him so long to show his face. Let's go back to the hall before we miss the special moments of seeing him walk into the hall." The voices faded as the two women moved away. The women's shamelessness stunned and irritated Mia, but she calmly pulled open the door and peeked her head out to see their retreating backs. One was wearing blue and the other red. She'd never felt possessive over someone like she felt for Neil. And knowing that the hall would be filled with women like these two, she decided to get her head out of the clouds and overcome her anxiety of attending the banquet. Xavier Galvera had been the country's mystery CEO, and it was no surprise that every woman would come with the hopes of being the Cinderella tonight. She couldn't wait for them to see that Xavier and Neil were the same person and that he had a girlfriend who's proudly pregnant with his child already. With the anticipation of seeing the women's faces after learning the truth, Mia hurried back into the room to dress up to match the position of being Mr. Galvera's partner. She had been dreading the moment she'd step out to the hall, but now that she had a silent mission to fend off any unwanted female attention from her man, she looked forward to seeing their expressions when they learned the truth about the man behind the Galvera enterprise. Seated at the dressing table 20 minutes later, Mia brushed her heavy hair until the burnished chocolate strands framed her face and tumbled in glorious waves over her shoulders. Then she hastily applied a rosy blusher to her cheeks, smoothed the matching gloss over her lips, and tossed the cosmetics into her purse. She didn't need too much makeup when she had no blemishes to hide. Furthermore, her skin had been glowing again lately. Neil had already knocked on her door a minute ago, and she knew he was surely standing outside waiting for her right now. The thought brought a glow of sheer happiness to her eyes as she leaned closer to the mirror and carefully put on the diamond earrings Neil had bought for her days ago. When she finished, she stepped back to study the effect of the long, sophisticated black dress she wore. The soft fabric emphasized her high, full breasts, and the long, tight sleeves hugged her arms all the way to the wrists, where they ended in points at the backs of her hands. The gold link belt nipped in the slightly blousy waistline, so that every feminine curve Mia possessed was beguilingly displayed, from the top of the straight neckline to the hem of the skirt where her 2-inch black heels peeped out. Neil had insisted she wear short heels, as he'd said safety and comfort first before fashion. He said he wouldn't be able to rest well knowing she was wearing high heels in her condition. Slipping while pregnant was something common in the elite world, he explained when she tried to argue that she could walk perfectly in high heels. He was right, she hadn't always been a fan of high heels but had wanted to wear them for the occasion. Now that she wore these 2-inch heels, she felt much more comfortable. Her dress didn't hide the fact that she was pregnant from the front view, as she had no intention of hiding it anymore. Looking at herself one last time in the mirror, she picked up her purse from the bed and left the room. And just like she'd thought, Neil was standing right at the door with his back to her, one hand shoved casually into his trouser pockets as he talked into the phone to Liam, who she heard was urging them to come down to the hall already. "I don't care about them. Mia's still dressing up, and I don't intend to rush her for some guests who are eager to get on my nerves and annoy the shit out of me," he was saying when she came out and stood behind him. As if he sensed her nearness, he turned his head sharply, and his eyes met hers across the 7-foot distance between them. He hung up the call and shoved the phone into his pocket without taking his eyes off of her and began to simply stroll towards her. As he turned completely towards her, Mia had her first full-length view of him, and her breath caught. His raven black tuxedo fit his tall, splendid frame as if it had been made specifically for him by the finest tailor. The dazzling whiteness of his inner shirt contrasted beautifully with his bronzed face and formal black bow tie, and he wore the elegant attire with the easy assurance of a man who was thoroughly accustomed to it. Mia felt absurdly proud of him, and she made no attempt to hide it when he finally stood in front of her with shimmering gray eyes. "Has anyone ever told you how beautiful you are?" she asked softly as she reached up her hands to adjust his bow tie and stroked his beardless jaw. A slow, boyish smile spread across his handsome features. "What would you think if I told you no?" Mia laughed. "I'd think you were trying to appear modest." "Then what am I supposed to do now?" he teased. "I suppose you should try to look a little flustered and embarrassed by the flattery." "I don't fluster or embarrass very easily." "In that case, you could try to fluster me by telling me how I look then," she hinted broadly, turning slowly so that she could deliberately give him the full shock effect of her dress. Her hair danced around her as she completed her turn and waited while Neil's gaze moved over her glowing face, luminous brown eyes, and softly full lips, then swept downward over the lush outlines of her figure. "Turn around so I can see the back again," he said with a small frown. Mia obediently complied. How can anything that looks so demure from the front be so open from the back? Her possessive lover asked with a hint of displeasure in his voice as he looked at Mia's trim back, her milky glowing skin exposed almost to the waistline. "What if you catch a cold?" he asked, turning her around to face him. "You look stunning in the dress, but I'm worried it's too open at the back." What the hell, man?" came Liam's voice from the end of the hallway. "The guests are waiting. Nobody is touching their food because they're too eager to meet you. You can neck with Mia later, but please, I can't stand another random stranger asking me if I know when Xavier Galvera will arrive." Liam had been waiting in the hall after he finished dressing up with Neil, but the people's anticipation was starting to get on his nerves. Not to mention his little niece clinging to Rain Wallace, who had been glaring daggers at him from across the room as if he'd done something unforgivable to her. The hall was filled with many people he disliked, and he couldn't wait to leave, but Neil was taking his time with his woman, leaving Liam to deal with all the bullshit in the hall. "Fuck off, Liam. Mia needs a change of outfit," Neil deadpanned, not caring about the eager guests or his friend's torture. "Oh no, she doesn't. That black dress looks stunning, and I think Mia likes it." "Don't you, Mia?" Liam asked from across the hall. Mia was quick to nod while nudging Neil in the side and glaring up at him. "Let's go. We've kept the guests waiting for too long." Chapter 222 Banquet, Part 3. Inside the banquet hall, nobody was touching their meal, even though the first course had been served. They were too anxious to meet Xavier Galvera to touch anything. As the music played softly in the background, the guests only sipped their drinks and mingled. Rain, who had arrived at the hall an hour ago like the rest of the guests, sat down with Lily in the front row of the table arrangements. She'd looked around the hall for Mia and Neil but had seen no signs of them. Neil had been the one to hand her the invitation card, and she'd naturally assumed they'd be here, but even though the hall's doors were now closed, she didn't see them. Thus, she sat with Lily while her father mingled with people. The girl had been keeping her company and had been talking non-stop about countless things, so Rain didn't have the chance to get bored or notice when that jerk, Liam, had disappeared from the hall. She'd wanted to have an opportunity to talk to him about lying to his niece about her being his future partner, but she hadn't gotten the chance to find him alone, as many women were swarming around him like flies on rotten food. She would admit that he was handsome, with a disarming smile that would put the top model of their country to shame, and eyes as dark as an endless pit that carried the promise of sweet nothings. She'd admit that if he hadn't been a Casanova and a jerk, she'd have still liked him and had a silly crush on him, just like every other woman in the hall. But she was smart enough to know better than to like someone like him. Where had he disappeared to just now? He had been standing right there, but now the spot was empty. She wouldn't be surprised if he'd whisked one of the women circling him a while ago into one of the hotel rooms. Nothing a Casanova like Liam Thompson couldn't do. With her best friend not being in the hall and her father busying himself among his business partners, she was already getting bored. Not to mention, the annoying cameras that were flashing in her direction every now and then made her wish she hadn't come here. If only her Max had been invited, she'd have passed her time with him. Why was this Xavier Galvera taking forever to show his face? She wondered the same question that was going through everyone's mind at that moment. The guests began to murmur amongst themselves, the curiosity and impatience palpable. Conversations buzzed with speculations about Xavier Galvera's delayed appearance. Some questioned if he'd even show up tonight or if they'd been played into attending a banquet by some prankster. It had been hours since they'd all been waiting. Were they being played? Then, the raised platform where the pianist and musicians had been playing soft music brightened up, and the music softened. A man dressed in a sleek black suit walked up to the platform with a welcoming, bright smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the hall, "I apologize for the delay. I hope you are all enjoying the evening so far." A ripple of polite applause and murmured agreement swept through the crowd. "I know every single one of you is dying to meet Xavier Galvera, who has managed to stay mysterious for as long as we've known him. But do not worry, Xavier Galvera has already arrived and will give a speech to all of his esteemed guests." Murmurs of anticipation broke from the guests. Young women, who'd been waiting for this special moment, began to push themselves forward toward the platform, eager to be the first Xavier noticed when he'd be stepping down the platform. Businessmen, who had waited for this moment, prepared themselves to finally see the enigmatic CEO who had taken the business world by storm in just a few weeks after his silence. Among the guests, Owen remained seated, a smirk playing on his lips as he sipped his wine and watched the man at the platform. In his mind, Xavier Galvera was just another rounded-bellied, bald-headed CEO. Owen believed that, eventually, whoever this Xavier was would want to meet him. He was an important person at the banquet, after all, and he wasn't going to demean himself by pushing to the front like some eager sycophant. The man on the platform stepped back and with a flourish announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the CEO of Galvera Enterprise." Everyone held their breath as a man clad in a black tuxedo walked out from the backstage of the platform. When his face registered among the crowd, a loud silence fell over the hall. The murmurs ceased, replaced by gasps and wide-eyed stares. Nobody in the hall had expected the man they saw standing on the platform to be Xavier Galvera, and when his emotionless gray eyes swiped around the large hall, they couldn't help but shiver at the electric shock that jolted them back to their senses. So Xavier Galvera, the owner and CEO of Galvera Enterprise, was none other than the country's Adonis hero, Neil Weiner? Owen's smirk immediately vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock as the wine he sipped remained suspended in his throat. He had not expected this. None of the guests had. How was this possible? How could this son of a bitch be the Xavier Galvera who was said to have an accent in his English? He would be damned to believe this. Perhaps there was some sort of mistake, and Weiner had stepped up to give some boring, uninterested speech before Xavier Galvera appeared. Owen waited for the part where Xavier Galvera would step forward, but that little hope of his was shattered by Neil's next speech to his guests. Neil cleared his throat and spoke, his voice detached and blank as he addressed the stunned guests. "I see you are all surprised to find out that I am the CEO behind Galvera Enterprise," he said, bringing the stunned guests back to reality. Many began to wonder how he got to manage a business when he was known as a soldier, a general, and as if reading their thoughts, Neil resumed his words. "Don't be too surprised. While my peers were playing and having fun in high school, I was thrust into military school, where I trained all day and attended business courses abroad online." He paused, letting his words sink in as the crowd stared, rapt with attention. "I had to study and read my ass off for exams while simultaneously training as a soldier. I graduated at the top of my class and earned my PhD. During those years, I ran this company from the space of my camp room, working through sleepless nights to bring it to where it is now." Admiring gasps broke from the guests as they listened to his speech, with countless flashes of cameras capturing the moment on live streams. Some of the guests couldn't help but record the moment on their phones, their respect for Neil increasing with every word he spoke. Neil continued, his tone unwavering and proud. "Galvera Enterprise represents not just business success but the culmination of relentless hard work and unwavering dedication. I thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this journey with me." A loud round of applause broke from the guests. His speech had touched everyone in the hall, and the eager females, who had thought Xavier Galvera to be another person, were now more determined than ever to be in his good graces. They knew it would be a plus for them if Neil, now known as Mr. Galvera, were to notice them, as he wasn't just a hero but a businessman who had worked his way to the top without feeding off anyone else. Furthermore, nobody had heard of him having a woman by his side after Mia Harrison, who they were sure wasn't invited, had broken his heart and made herself a laughingstock in the country. What a loser she was to lose such a man, but then her loss would be their gain. However, while many women were eager at the front, at the back of the hall, the woman in the mask remained hidden, her gaze fixed on Neil. Though her face was hidden, her brown eyes were not. They shimmered with longing as they lingered on the man on stage. Once he got down from that stage, she'd take him to one of the hotel rooms to talk to him. It was about time he knew about her. She was his first true sweetheart and not her sister. Her fingers tightened around her glass as she stared at him with a longing that tore at her heart and made her want to throw herself into his strong arms and kiss him for the first time. She couldn't help but silently wonder how he'd react when she told him she was that little girl he promised to marry when he grew up. Would he hug her and kiss her with the same longing she'd been suppressing? She couldn't wait to find out. The paparazzi in the hall began to fire questions at Neil when he finished his speech, and he answered with a straight face that showed no emotion. "Mr. Weiner, how did you manage both your military career and running a major corporation?" "I prioritize and manage my time efficiently," Neil replied calmly. "Discipline and determination are key." "What's next for Galvera Enterprise?" another reporter asked. "We will continue to innovate and expand, staying true to our core values and commitment to excellence," Neil stated firmly. "Are you the man who also handles all of the other Galvera branches in the world?" "We heard the branch in Mirage Mesa had been run by Noah Galvera, but it has never flourished like it did when you took over. What do you have to say about that?" From this question, a lot of personal questions began to come at Neil at once, without giving him the chance to answer. "Mr. Galvera, is it true that you are in a secret relationship with Annalise Martinez, the supermodel? Are you in a relationship with anyone now? Because we heard you'd be picking a Cinderella tonight from among all the lovely women in the hall." Chapter 223 His Woman. "Mr. Galvera, is it true that you are in a secret relationship with Annalise Martinez, the supermodel? Are you in a relationship with anyone now? Because we heard you'd be picking a Cinderella tonight from among all the lovely women in the hall." The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived, Neil thought. For the first time since he stepped onto the stage, he allowed himself a smile. The guests, at first, misunderstood his smile, thinking he agreed on choosing a Cinderella tonight, but that wasn't what was on Neil's mind. He looked up at the flashing cameras and addressed his guests. About my relationship, Neil began, his voice steady and clear. I am indeed in a relationship with the most wonderful woman in the world, who means everything to me. In fact, she is carrying my child, and very soon, everyone will be invited to our wedding once we decide to have one. He was the kind to keep his personal life private, but he knew if the world didn't know of his relationship with Mia, they wouldn't stop dragging her name through the mud. Neil's words made disappointment wash over the eager female guests. Some looked on in curiosity as to which woman he was speaking of, while others cried internally as they knew they'd lost. However, the elderly women in the hall didn't miss the note of pride and love as he talked about his woman. One of the reporters quickly regained his senses and asked, "Who is this woman you speak of? Is she among the guests in the hall?" Neil's gray eyes shimmered at that question, and he replied with a simple, "Yes." He then turned to his right side and stretched out his arm, gesturing for Mia, who was standing backstage, to come forward. The guests in the hall watched as a slender hand emerged from the curtains and grasped Neil's outstretched hand. They watched in astonishment as the woman stepped out completely from behind the curtain. Though many had begun to suspect it to be Mia Harrison when Neil mentioned his woman was pregnant, they hadn't dwelled on it as they'd heard she was pregnant by one of her online customers. But now, seeing her confirmed their suspicions, everyone was stunned and speechless. Mia was dressed in a black dress that hugged her body and showed the little bump in her lower abdomen. Despite the fact that she was pregnant, she still looked as beautiful as ever, with those mesmerizing dimples on her cheeks when she smiled. The last time she had been in public had been when she was humiliated on the floor of a banquet hall, but now she glowed like the Cinderella of the ball, causing everyone to stare at her in astonishment. Neil's voice broke the silence again. He looked at the guests with his arm protectively wrapped around Mia's waist. "Meet the woman who has given me the strength to overcome many challenges. She was with me when I escaped prison. She showed me love when the world turned its back on me. Her arms were open when I needed someone to run to, and her presence in my life has taught me that there is more joy in having a woman in your life than having fame and wealth." Mia felt her eyes burn with tears as she turned to glance at Neil. Her heart swelled with warmth when she realized he had been gazing at her while he spoke. He tightened his hold around her waist, as if to tell her he'd forever stand with her, and he smiled down at her, silently encouraging her to allow her tears of joy. She smiled through her tears, and he raised his hand to wipe them away from her cheeks while stroking her baby bump with his other hand. Every single affectionate gesture between them was captured on camera by the paparazzi and reporters. Mixed emotions swept through the crowd as they witnessed the subtle, affectionate gestures between the couple. Some guests looked at Mia with envy, others with open disdain. The whispers grew louder, filled with incredulity and gossip. The elderly women nodded approvingly, recognizing the sincerity in Neil's words and actions, while the younger, jealous women thought otherwise. "Neil must be blind to pick a whore like Mia," someone among the guests sneered. "How does he know she's carrying his child when she's whored around with countless men? She's a whore, a two-faced bitch." Neil noticed and heard the loud whispers. As he took his gaze away from Mia, his expression hardened. The aloof and stern demeanor that settled on his face made the guests shut up at once. This time, when he spoke into the mic, there was a trace of threat in his voice. "Recently, a lot of people have taken it upon themselves to punish my woman for a crime she didn't commit, and some have gone as far as to frame her," Neil said, his voice cold and unyielding. "I have overlooked a lot of bullshit lately, but I won't anymore. From now on, anybody who dares to say or do anything against Mia Harrison will face the consequences of my wrath." He looked directly into the camera, emphasizing his words for those watching from home, including Kelvin Rodrigo. "Hurting Mia is like hurting me, and you won't like the side of me you see when you cross that line." Everyone in the hall got his message loud and clear. They knew the aftermath of crossing someone like Neil, especially now that they knew he was Xavier Galvera. The room fell into a tense silence as guests held their tongues. After his warning, he looked back at the guests and said, "Enjoy the rest of the evening." Then he led Mia carefully down the platform. At the back of the hall, Owen hurled his wine glass onto the marble floor, causing the people standing around him to jump. The music drowned out the sound of breaking glass for most, but the anger on Owen's face was unmistakable. Veins throbbed on his forehead as he struggled to contain his rage. He couldn't believe Mia was pregnant with Neil's child, and even worse, that Neil was Xavier Galvera. His blue eyes turned murderous as he realized he had lost this time. There was no way Neil would help his company now, and there was no way he'd sit still while the woman he loved birthed a child of his enemy. He couldn't accept defeat so easily. Wayner had purposely invited him with the VIP invitation card to rub his revelation in his face and embarrass the shit out of him. The man sure is clever, but Owen would show him what clever was. That son of a bitch had looked straight at him when he said anyone who hurt Mia would have to face him. Did the fucker think he would hurt the woman he loved the most in the world? He'd never hurt Mia. She was the love of his life and the reason he wanted to have all the wealth. She was the reason he'd watched Elizabeth Harrison die that night, and she was the reason he wanted to build an empire. He'd never hurt her, never. But Neil Wayner, that son of a bitch, would regret what he did tonight. He'd find a way to destroy Neil and take back what he believed was rightfully his, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, at the back of the hall, the masked woman sat still on her chair, her grip tightening around the glass as she couldn't believe what she'd just heard and seen. That was supposed to be her. She was supposed to be in that position Mia was right now. He'd promised to marry her, and not her sister. For 20 years, she had looked forward to the day she would come back to Mirage Mesa and meet him again. The dreams she had harbored were now crumbling in the face of undeniable reality. Just like Mia had taken their mother's attention and love 20 years ago, she had taken Xavier's love as well. It was supposed to be her. She was the one he had promised to have this life with, not Mia. Her grip tightened on the glass until it made a cracking sound as she stared at Mia's smiling face while Neil introduced her to some of his business partners in the hall. "You can't have it all, sister." Mia, who was being introduced to Neil's business partners, smiled as she shook their hands. However, she felt the hairs on her neck rising as if someone were staring at her. The feeling was so intense she turned to see who it was, but was surprised to find the place empty, with only a woman clad in a black dress walking away. Mia stared at the woman's back as she made her way out of the hall. For some reason, she felt a sense of familiarity with the woman, even though she didn't see her face, just her retreating back. Was she the one staring at her a moment ago? A lot of people had been staring at her since she had walked down the platform with Neil, but this one felt different. "What's wrong?" Neil's voice fell right at the shell of her ear, making her look away from the door the woman had walked through and turn back to him. It seemed he had noticed her staring in that direction, as his gaze was there as well, trying to see what she was looking at. "Nothing," she smiled at him when he turned back to look down at her face. She then looked away shyly when he gave her one of those intoxicating looks of his, as if to gauge her expression. She looked around the hall and noticed most of the young women were staring at Neil and following him around with their gazes. It was like they were all looking for an opportunity to approach him and start their act of seduction, like those two women in the hotel hallway had said. They didn't care if he was married or not. "It seems my boyfriend is too beautiful, so nobody is eating their food or mingling anymore. They're just staring at him," she murmured in a voice barely above a whisper as she looked at the women. Among them, she caught sight of Elena Fanning, who looked nothing like her arrogant self from a week ago. She was standing away from the rest, her skin looked dull, and the dress she wore didn't seem like something an arrogant person like her would wear to such an event. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that moment, Mia saw a glimpse of shame in her expression as Elena quickly lowered her gaze and turned away to leave. But she was stopped by two men in suits, one standing on each side of her. From the looks of it, one of the men was scolding her about something, and the other dragged her by the arm and pulled her away. "What happened to her?" she murmured to no one in particular as she watched the men drag her into the serving room that was in the hall. Neil, who noticed she was looking at a nobody like Elena Fanning, who had humiliated her in the banquet hall of the Wallaces and was now paying for it, firmly took her chin between his thumb and forefinger and turned her face up to his, forcing her to look into his teasing gray eyes. "If I'm so beautiful, why won't you look at me like everyone else then?" he teased, trying to distract her from someone as insignificant as Miss Fanning. "That was a silly thing for me to say," Mia said, blushing at the fact that he'd heard her murmured words a while ago, and "it was definitely a gross exaggeration," he smiled, taking his hand away from her chin, "but I liked it. And, in case you're interested," he added, his voice turning husky, "no one has ever called me beautiful before." Neil glanced up as someone called his name, then pretended he hadn't heard. Putting his hand beneath her elbow, he steered her toward one of the tables where waiters were serving hot and cold hors d'oeuvres. "Let's get something for you to eat and drink. You haven't eaten or taken your medications for the night." In the ensuing 5 minutes, 10 other people called his name. "The next time it happened," he said irritably, "as much as I'd like to spend the evening alone with you, we're going to have to socialize. I can't keep pretending I'm blind and deaf much longer." "I understand," Mia said sympathetically as she sipped her juice. "Most of them attended the banquet to talk business with you and not to celebrate." "Well, I didn't throw the damned banquet to talk business with anyone but two." He stopped short as he realized he was about to give himself away about the surprise he had for Mia tonight. Not wanting to raise her suspicions, he said, "I'm not in the mood to talk business with any of them." "If you really don't want to talk to anyone about business, there's no reason why you have to do it," she said, patting his shoulder. "When people have come thousands of miles to talk to you, they can be damned persistent," he responded, glancing at the other guests again. "And unless I miss my guess, there are at least dozens of other men who won't give up until they've bored me out with their business plans. Just leave them to me," Mia said with a bewitching smile. "I'll hold them off." "You will?" he grinned. "And just how will you do that, Carita?" Beneath her luxuriant russet lashes, her brown eyes were twinkling as she said, "The moment anyone starts talking to you about business, I'll interrupt and pretend to distract you." Neil's gaze dropped to her lips. "That shouldn't be difficult. You always distract me anyway." Chapter 224 Casanova. In another part of the hall, Rain carried the sleeping Lily in her arms as she looked around for Liam Thompson, who'd been out of her sight most of the time. She hadn't had time to even talk to Mia and get the gist of how Neil turned out to be Xavier Galvera because she had been holding the sleeping girl the whole time. Lily had eaten every single meal served to their table and had seemed to enjoy it to the extent that Rain had joined her, but she had fallen asleep immediately after finishing eating, and now, Liam, who'd brought the girl to the event, was nowhere in sight. Though Lily was a petite little girl for her age, she still weighed a lot more than she looked, so Rain's arms were aching from having to carry her rather than leaving her to sleep on the table where the guests were bothering the girl and trying to get her to tell them more about her uncle. Rain had made sure to shoo them off so as not to bother the girl. And now she was walking in high heels, carrying a 6-year-old girl, looking for her Casanova uncle who'd disappeared. Unable to find him, Rain began to ask around for him, and luckily, after asking a few women, she was directed to the backstage area. The hallway that led to the backstage room was empty, and she began to doubt if there was anyone in the room until she pushed the door open and got the shock of her life by the scene she was met with. She froze at the entrance in disbelief. Though she'd suspected Liam Thompson was probably with a woman somewhere, she'd not expected to find him making out with Linda Tudor in a place like the backstage room. Liam, who was busy trying to get Linda out of her dress, turned angrily at the person who dared interrupt them, but froze when he saw Rain Wallace standing at the door with the sleeping Lily in her arms. For a moment, he was at a loss for words as he stared back at her. "Why are you standing there like a fool?" Linda sneered. "Can't you see we are busy, or do you want to watch us do it in front of you?" "Get out of here." Rain's green eyes moved to Linda, but she had no words for a brainless fool like her. She glared at Liam before she turned on her heels and left the two to continue whatever they were doing. It was none of her business. Liam Thompson could sleep with and neck any woman he pleased. It wasn't like they were friends or lovers. "Miss Wallace." She heard him call her from behind, but she ignored him. Rain's pace quickened as she heard Liam's footsteps pounding after her. She tightened her grip on Lily, who slept soundly in her arms, oblivious to the turmoil around her. Liam jogged to catch up and grabbed Rain's arm, causing her to stop abruptly. She yanked her arm away, glaring up at him with blazing green eyes. "Don't you dare touch me," she spat, her voice low and seething with anger. Liam's frustration was evident as he gritted his teeth. "What the hell is your problem, Miss Wallace? You've been glaring at me all evening for no reason, and now this." "My problem?" Rain scoffed, her voice rising. "I have a problem with everything you do, Mr. Thompson. I have a problem with the fact that you keep lying to your niece about us. I have a problem with the fact that you allow that witch, Linda Tudor, to hurt Lily when you're not around. Have you even seen the marks on her arm?" Liam's eyes narrowed in confusion and alarm. "What are you talking about?" Rain turned sharply, her expression one of fierce determination. "Raise the sleeves of Lily's dress." Liam did as instructed, his face paling as he saw the red marks of fingernails marring Lily's delicate skin. "How did she get these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rain's disgust was palpable. "She got them from your so-called girlfriend, Linda Tudor, who disciplines Lily for always talking about me and how you promised to marry me instead of her." Liam looked horrified, his eyes darting between the sleeping girl and Rain. I had no idea." "Of course, you didn't," Rain retorted. "You're too busy with your latest conquest to notice. I don't care who you sleep with, Mr. Thompson, but stop lying and stop allowing people to hurt the girl for things as innocent as wanting to see her uncle happy." Liam's mind raced as he recalled the previous night. Lily had come to him, wanting to talk to him about Linda, but he'd dismissed her, thinking it was just another childish complaint of hers about how Linda looked like a ghost and how she didn't like the woman coming to the house. Now, the look in Rain's eyes made him feel like the worst kind of fool. Running his fingers through his hair, he tried to explain. "Rain, Before he could finish, Linda's voice echoed down the hallway. "Liam, are you coming?" Rain's expression hardened. Unable to stand another moment with someone like Liam or his girlfriend, she handed the sleeping child to him. And when Liam reached out to take his niece from her arm, her fingers grazed past his arm. Her touch felt like fire against his skin that made him stop for a moment. "I'm leaving," she said coldly. "If you want to keep allowing some brainless idiot to hurt your niece, that's your choice." The contact of their hands sent an unexpected jolt through Liam, a mixture of guilt, anger, and something he couldn't quite identify rushed through his veins. He watched helplessly as Rain gave him one last disgusted look before turning away, wiping her arm on her dress as if to rid herself of the burning feeling his touch must have left. Liam stood there, holding Lily, as he watched her leave, her hair and hips swaying with every step she took until she disappeared around the corner. "Liam, come on!" Linda's voice snapped him back to his senses. And his expression hardened as he recalled Rain's words and the marks on Lily's arm. He could overlook a lot of things, but not his niece getting hurt right under his nose without his knowledge. He tightened his grip around the sleeping girl and turned back to Linda. "We have to talk, and put your dress back on. I'm no longer interested." Chapter 225. To get away from him. Back in the hall, Mia did exactly as she'd promised Neil. With tactical brilliance, she smoothly extricated him from at least a dozen business conversations. The moment the discussion began to get too deeply involved in business, she interrupted to sweetly remind him that he had promised to get her a drink, take her for a walk, show her the grounds, or whatever ploy occurred to her at the moment. And Neil let her do it, observing her highly effective tactics with a mixture of frank admiration and veiled amusement. With his drink in his left hand and his right arm around her waist, he kept her by his side, shamelessly using her as a voluntary shield. But as the evening progressed and the wine flowed, conversations became louder, the laughter more hilarious, the jokes more bawdy. And the men who wanted to detain Neil became more persistent. "Do you really need to walk out a cramp in your leg?" Neil asked in a teasing whisper as they strolled away from one of the businessmen who wanted Neil to tell him everything about the Galvera investment with the new mall they planned to build in NY. Mia was sipping her third glass of a delicious non-alcoholic after-dinner drink that had the taste of a chocolate malt, but she was beginning to realize it was far more addictive than she wanted it to be. She wanted more. "Of course not, my legs are perfect," she chuckled softly, turning around the hall to see if she'd sight one of the waiters carrying the after-dinner chocolate drink. "Neil, I want more of this," she mused, craning her neck to look for the waiter. "Can you get me another glass?" Neil took Mia's empty glass from her hand and put it down on a table beside his. "Nope, you've had enough for the night. Too much of everything is not good," he said, taking her arm. "Shall we walk down to the beach outside the hotel?" he asked when she started to protest. He watched as her brown eyes brightened at the thought of taking a stroll on the beach. She eagerly nodded her head, but quickly pulled her arm out of his and said, "Before we go, I need to visit the ladies' room. I'll be back in a minute." And she hurriedly excused herself, leaving Neil alone. Mia was happy at the thought of taking a night stroll with Neil outside the fancy hotel that was located beside a beach. She hurriedly finished her business in the ladies' room and was touching up her lipstick and powder when she heard the door to the restroom open. At first, she didn't bother to look toward the entrance, believing it might be another woman who needed to use the restroom until she finished and turned to leave, but stopped in shock as she was met with Owen, leaning casually against the door, looking at her with a smile that made her skin crawl. She hadn't met him in person in a while until now. Though he'd instilled fear in her the day he tried to force himself on her and even slapped her, she didn't allow herself to show her fear like a coward. Instead, she picked up her purse from the sink side and decided to act like she didn't know him. "Can you please step away from the door?" she asked, her voice steady. Owen shrugged nonchalantly. "As you please," he said, stepping away from the door and motioning for her to pass. Mia sensed something wrong with the fact that he moved away from the door so easily, and she was proven right when she pulled the doorknob and realized it had been locked with a key. Turning to him, she saw the key dangling between his fingers as he grinned at her. "Looking for this?" he taunted. Mia's fingers clenched around her dress as she tried to hide her fear and dread of being locked alone with Owen. "What do you want, Owen? Why are you here?" she asked calmly. Owen chuckled. "Didn't you know that bastard Wayner invited me to the banquet to rub it in my face that he is Xavier Galvera?" "I wasn't talking about the banquet," Mia replied sharply. "I meant here, in the ladies' room. Why are you here?" Owen shrugged again. "Because I missed you and wanted to talk to you alone." "Did you miss me as well?" he asked, stepping closer to her. His gaze lowered to the bump on her abdomen, and he clicked his tongue in disgust. "So it's true. You're carrying the child of that bastard. I can't believe you let him touch and plant one of his rotten seeds in you." Mia began to retreat as he advanced on her. "Neil is not a bastard, and you should watch how you speak to me," she fired back, her voice steady but her eyes trembled slightly, betraying her fear of being locked with him. Owen raised an amused eyebrow at her words. "Oh, so now you'll support him. Stop pretending to love him when he's not here. No one is here to hear or see us. I know you still love me, and it's okay. I'll accept it. Aborting a child isn't a big deal. I'll get a good doctor to do it for you, and we can leave the country and start anew. Pick any country you want and we'll move there. It should be my child you're carrying and not Wayner's." Mia's arms protectively wrapped around her stomach as she glanced at Owen, horrified at the fact that he believed she would kill her child for him or leave Neil. "You're delusional if you think I'd ever do that, Owen. I'd never harm my child, and I'd never leave Neil for you or anyone." Owen's smile faltered slightly, and his eyes darkened. "Oh, Mia," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You don't know what's best for you. But don't worry, you'll come running back to me when your Neil abandons you when I'm done with you." Mia's heart raced as she realized she needed to find a way out. She took a deep breath and tried to keep her voice steady. "Owen, let me out. Now." He laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Not until we've had our little chat," he said, stepping even closer. Mia's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to escape. She needed to get back to Neil. She needed to get away from this psychopath. "There's nothing for us to talk about," she said firmly. "Open the door and let me out." Owen's expression hardened, and he reached out to grab her arm. "You're not going anywhere until I say so," he hissed. "Do you think I'd let you get away with cheating on me with Wayner? And do you think for a second Wayner will still want to keep you when he finds out the truth about your childhood?" Mia stopped struggling and glanced at him with a frown. "What truth about my childhood?" she asked, yanking her arm away from his grip. Owen smirked, knowing he'd gotten her right where he wanted. Placing his hands on both sides of her head, he caged her to the door and leaned down to whisper, "There's so much about yourself you don't know, Mia. Haven't you always wondered why you don't remember some certain parts of your childhood?" He used his fingertips to stroke her cheeks. Mia wanted to push at him, tried to move away from his touch, but there was no place to go when he'd caged her to the door. Her skin crawled at his touch. And as much as she wanted to get away from him, she was curious to hear what he had to say about her childhood that had remained an unsolved puzzle to her for years. "Don't make up things, Owen, because no matter what you say, I won't believe you." Mia gritted. He chuckled. "Really? You won't believe me when I say you and Wayner grew up in the same neighborhood before you moved to Zen? You won't believe me when I say you've had a huge crush on him that caused your obsession with gray eyes?" "What are you talking about?" Mia asked, hating the fact that she wanted to hear everything he knew. "I'm talking about the fact that you've been a two-faced bitch right from your childhood, and I love you even more for that. Who would have thought an innocent girl like you was capable of killing at a very young age? I wonder what Wayner's reaction would be when I tell him you are not the girl he loved as a child." Mia felt that same headache that always gripped her whenever she tried to force herself to remember things she didn't know. She pushed away from Owen. "Get away from me. I don't want to hear any of your lies. Tisk, you don't want to hear the rest of your past?" Owen said as he advanced on her, You don't want to hear how you nailed a girl's hand to the ground and stabbed an innocent housekeeper for stopping you from going out? Oh, yeah, you also don't want to hear how you tricked the little Wayner into believing you were the girl he liked? Stop talking, you psychopath! Mia yelled, covering her ears with her palms as his words triggered something in her head, making her dizzy. If I am a psychopath, you are also one, my love. We are meant for each other. I killed my best friend when I was a teenager, and you killed an innocent housekeeper for doing her job. Neil Wayner is only with you because he thinks you are his childhood sweetheart. If he knew everything you did, he'll abandon you. Come to me, and I'll protect you, my love. He reached out and grabbed her arms. Mia's pulse quickened, and she knew she had to act fast before she went mad with all the things ringing inside her head. With all her strength, she wrenched her arm free from his grip, yanked the key from his fingers, and bolted toward the door, praying she could unlock it before he caught her again.